Hello, 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 hello. How many times can I say that? A lot of times, I just want to get people cheered up out there, but also entertain them with some really interesting stories and interesting guests. And I have them on all the time, and I get to know these people very well. I do a little chat before the show here on Dave Emmons and the Strange Reality, and I'm glad to have you all here. I know Facebook people, you're helping me out quite a bit with views and things of that nature. And I do have a media manager that I'm just getting involved in. I'm not a techie person, so we had a little bit of email problem a while ago. Tried to straighten it out with a link, and it was about all the way to my top of my knowledge of technicalities. So, but we got it through, and we're here. We're doing the show, and quite an interesting guest. But I want to talk about what's going on today. I know that a lot of people are thinking that there's going to be disclosure. Dr. Stephen Greer has a group of people, I guess whistleblowers, that are going to get together. It's supposed to be within 72 hours. I guess it'd be Saturday, maybe, that he's supposed to come forward with all these people and disclose ETs and UFOs are real. But I'm waiting for the future president, Donald Trump, to come forward Tuesday. He's going to tell us all about these drones, these plasmoids, these orbs, what we've been seeing all over the world. And they are all over the world. They're in China, they're in Russia, they're in Europe. They started in UK and then they come here to the US. So we have them all over. So people are wondering what's going on. Our government hasn't said anything, and that's sad. And actually, future President Trump, he said that they should be telling us what's going on with all these drones flying over your neighborhoods, and they're not drones really. I don't think since I'm an ET person, I've got a book about all my experiences, my first book, and I knew that there was ETs when I was 13 years of age because I saw this UFO 70 feet off the ground with my best friend, and I'm sure that we was abducted because there's a couple of things that happened. But this is not my show. But I just want to tell you a little bit about my background about being there and knowing what these things are. If they try to deviate from the story, I mean, it's kind of like here's a copy of my book. They, you know, what do they want? And that's part of what I've known for years. So I hope it's going to be a disclosure. I hope people will be, we're not going to be happy about anything. We got fires on the West Coast. We've had floods, and we've had, hurricanes on the East Coast. And then even in Europe, they've had their share of trouble. And the person I'm interviewing tonight, she's from Europe. I won't say her location unless she wants to, not her exact location, but what country, but I'll allow her to do that if she wants to. But on the strange reality, my guest tonight is here's how we start off with this. It's Nikki Holmes is her name. And it says here, what kind of stories does as a nun turned archaeologist tell? She's got a lot of stories to tell. She's written 14 books, and they're compelling ones. And N.L.Holmes, so that's what you'll see, I guess, on her books as an author with an extraordinary background, delivers three immersive historical fiction series that unravel the mysteries of life during the ancient Egyptian Empire. And that's something I'm interested in, that Egyptian Empire. These books are a treasure trove for readers captivated by the intrigue and power plays behind one of history's greatest dynasties. And I think they were. I think the Atlanteans probably crossed into uh, ancient Egypt. Maybe Nikki might tell us about a little bit about that. Drawing from decades of experience as an archaeologist and professor, Holmes masterfully combines historical accuracy with riveting storytelling. Her novels transport readers to a world of explosive political shifts, dramatic family dynamics, and shocking scandals, all set against the backdrop of a rapidly evolving society, just like it is today. Nikki Holmes, you've got a one one heck of a diverse background, and it must be really must be really exciting to you know to know all this stuff and be there and have the background that you have, and your books are novels, so uh,
Right.
they are They're fiction or nonfiction, would you call them?
They're fiction. Yeah. Mysteries mostly.
Okay, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself that I didn't read off? I know you have an extraordinary background, and that paragraph or so didn't do you justice. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing today?
Well, I'm a Texan by birth and upbringing. I entered the a cloistered convent at the age of 21, and I stayed there for nearly 20 years. When I came out, I went back to school, back to university, and picked up where I had intended to go as a child, and that was into archaeology. So I started studying archaeology and went to Bryn Mawr College and did my PhD there. And I've been teaching on and off since that time at the university level, ancient history, ancient humanities, with some time off to be an interior decorator. And I had, before I entered the convent, I had an antique store. So I've always been interested in this sort of thing. And for a while, I was the executive assistant of an educational foundation. So pretty scattershot CV there.
What, what an experience. I mean, you've had
Yeah, that's
a great,
spotty.
a great resume. I've done a lot of things, but I don't think I've done a lot of things that you've done. I mean, but you're very a progressive and a very successful person. And as a professor, you have to know what you're doing and what you're teaching. Are you into archaeology, Nikki?
Yeah, archaeology
Oh,
is what my degree is in,
okay. Uh,
and mostly Greek and Near Eastern, not actually Egyptian, although I've been writing about Egypt.
okay. I wanted to ask you. Want to get real deep about this, but what caused you to stop being a nun, Nikki?
Well, it is a kind of a complicated answer, but to say it in a few relatively few words, I guess I came to the appreciation that I was no longer where I was supposed to be, that I had served my purpose there, and it had served its purpose in my life, and it was time to move on to something else.
Mhm. So there wasn't anything in the theology that you kind of got away from, or you didn't want to be involved in it any longer. And what are you?
No,
Yeah.
no, it was a kind of tumultuous moment there. It was after the Vatican Council. We were revising our constitution as an order, as a religious order, which was tricky because the first version was written by Saint Teresa, and obviously a venerated figure. And who were we to, give the lie to what she had said? But things did have to be updated, so it was a little tumultuous, but that was not the reason I left.
Right. Yeah. It's what do you think about the Pope nowadays? He went to, I think it was on Christmas or something. He opened up the doors to the uh
Oh, for the holy air,
fallen,
yeah.
to the fallen angels, I guess. So who are those fallen angels, Nikki?
I have no idea. As far as I know, he was just inaugurating the year of pilgrimage, the holy year. They're opening it for pilgrims, presumably human pilgrims. Um, what other lore surrounds that? I don't know.
Right. It was a unique I guess a lot of news agencies caught on to that. And the Pope is he's actually 3 or 4 weeks ago he said that there will be more supernatural things that people will see. And he says just be ready for it, he said, and accept it and let God be your guide in what you're seeing. Don't have fear. He said there will
Yeah,
be an increase in supernatural things, and we've been seeing that in this
yeah,
today. I know you say you live in a kind of a secluded area and you don't see a lot or get a lot of outside information, which could
right.
that means you could be relaxed.
Yeah, yes, it's better than living in a city right now.
Yeah, especially the big cities. I don't live in a big city either. I live in Illinois, but not in a big city. I wouldn't want to at this point, but
Uh,
even at that, we're talking. I know you live in Europe, and I didn't know that till a while ago. And I thought, oh, you poor woman, you're here at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's 7 o'clock for me, in the evening. I didn't really realize that your PR person didn't make a note.
no, that's fine. I told her I was cool with it.
Okay, But no, I'm glad to see you, and I'm glad we got hooked up, especially with the links that were going on. Now, you went from being a nun, you went back to school, got your PhD. I didn't see any mention of Dr. Nikki Holmes. You don't call
Well,
yourself?
I only use that in an academic context. Yeah, when I'm writing, I'm just plain old NL.
Okay. Yeah. Uh yeah, for books that's a good thing. You know, a lot of people, even men and women, it's just not, the men do the same thing, like DL or whatever, So it's
Uh,
just a mark of who they are, and it separates themselves. Like it's just like me. I know when I write books, it's Dave Emmons, but how many Dave Emmons are there? There's a lot of them. So you know,
uh,
yeah, it's kind of confusing. So you go by them little abbreviations, whatever. But
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, now you teach archaeology. What are some of the things that have been found recently? Do you keep up with the recent archaeological events, Nikki?
I haven't kept up actually very much because I've been retired for quite a few years now.
Okay.
But I can tell you what was the most interesting or moving thing that I found, or the team I was working on found, and that was on the island of Crete, the Minoan culture. This object, it was a big pot that maybe, a jar, a giant jar,
Right.
that had been broken into 250 pieces or something. And when we put it together, we found that it had fingerprints all over it, uh, like handprints and black paint or what soot or something. And it was very touching because you could it was somebody's hand, some particular person. It could only have been the hand of one person in the whole history of the world, and it was like they were kind of reaching up from the past to say, "Remember me." I found that very moving, actually.
Were there any other artifacts laying around it, or any indication there's a
It,
build?
it was yeah, it was in I forget what context now. It was in a room, with probably other broken pottery things that had been discarded. But you wonder, was it the potter's child? I mean, they were rather small hands, or was it just some small adult that was working on it? Was this meant to be a decoration,
Yeah.
or was it an accident? Did
Right.
Dad get mad at the little rascal and say, "Oh, you ruined that pot"? So we
Yeah.
don't know. But
Yeah.
there's a novel there someplace, I
Yeah.
think.
Did you have it dated? Was there any carbon dating on it, Nikki?
It was. I don't think there was anything in it that it could have been carbon dated, but the context would have dated it. And I don't remember what the date was, but it was something like 1500 BC or something.
Mhm. Yeah, that's far enough away.
Yeah.
Now I'm reading some of your notes here, and I'm going from those notes that are given to you by PR person. The fascinating link between historical fiction and today's political and cultural changes. Could you elaborate on that, Nikki, on that phrase?
Well, I think that was particularly dramatic in the Lord Hani Mysteries series, which covered the period between the rise to power of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh, and then his death and successors and coming to power of his son, Tutankhamun. It was a really interesting and again tumultuous moment in Egyptian history in which he's sort of come down as the heretic pharaoh. He just overthrew the entire traditional worldview of the Egyptians and their religion, the way they wrote, the way they spoke. I mean, it was in the art. It was an incredibly profound social upheaval that, as a autocratic ruler, he just sort of snapped his fingers and everything changed. I mean, it was like the Mad Tea Party in that sense. And my book dealt with sort of the states of mind of a diplomat, a government employee, a real person actually. But I tried to imagine what it would have been like for a person serving a regime like that, to find the king doing such extraordinary and horrible things. I mean, it would have seemed horrible to them. They're refusing the worship of their traditional gods. It must have. seemed like the end of the world to these people, and what that would cost them in their families or in their professional lives, and how their consciences would have dealt with something like that. So I think, we've been through quite a lot of upheaval as Americans here in the last 10 years,
Yes.
a
Mhm.
lot of division and what have you. And I think probably the spotlight has been on a lot of government officials who've had conscience difficulties. And so I felt like that. Plus, there was a plague. So there's our COVID there. It was just an extraordinary parallel with our own times, I felt. And it made a really interesting background for a series of novels.
Mm. Well, way I understand it, I wrote a book, Angels and Supernatural Entities. And in that book, I ran across a story from Egypt. I wanted to cover that. And it was actually about Isis and
Mm.
Tot. And her husband, it was a king, and his name, it's slipping away from me. The name of Isis's husband, in which
Osiris?
Osiris, yeah, in which his brother killed him and
All right.
scattered his remains all over Egypt. And then they put him back together, and then
Yeah.
he was able to come back and have a child with Isis. And that goes back into, I know you're not into the ET studies too much, but that's where I got into the involved in thinking, well, maybe, you know, he was a robot or some kind of a android,
Mm.
and they put him back together, and but how could he produce a baby? Or what, I don't know. The story is really fascinating, but Isis was a really respected woman, uh,
Right.
from the Egyptian women, and she loved children, and she admired women who had children, had families, and I get that story. It's just kind of weird, and it kind of started things off. You mentioned politics as we get into this ISIS thing, and this the politics of the time. Actually, we follow a lot of their rules and politics. It's just like the Ten Commandments that we have, and I think the Egyptians had 14 commandments, and they were just like the commandments that we have. Is that right, Nikki?
I don't know that there was a particular number, but certainly they had a highly developed moral code. And when they died, they were in the other world. Their souls would be judged, and they would make a kind of profession or a confession, as they called it, or as we call it. Uh, I did these good things. I fed orphans and helped little old ladies across the street and things like that. And I did not do this. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't
Right.
rip off widows. I didn't, steal anything. So I think the number of sins there varied, but you know, they felt they had to live a righteous life in this life in order to prosper in the afterlife. So that certainly goes along with what Christianity believes.
Yeah, the more I read about the Egyptian culture, the more I felt that they were pretty civilized, and they had a civilized
Very,
society, government,
very.
and laws and rules, as we just talked. And
Mm-hmm.
the more I studied that, I wanted to ask this question: Who? And I'll ask this one way out in left field here, Nikki.
Okay.
Who built the pyramids?
Well, as a scientist, I have to say that I think it was the Egyptians, and it's sometimes hard to believe that mere humans could have done something so amazing, especially with their primitive tools. But people are smart and they're very skillful. And the thing about the Egyptians is they had a scientific head. They would, as in medicine too, they were very advanced. They would do things sort of by trial and error, and then they would write down what worked and what didn't. And so subsequent generations could refer back to these case books and see what worked. So I have the highest respect for them. In many ways, they do seem more than humanly skillful.
Well, I was challenged with this thought as being an ET, studying or ufologist type of person. I they A lot of times they say the ETs help them build these things and give them the knowledge,
Who
and
knows?
yeah, and we don't really know. But then I was confronted by a guest that I had that talked about that we had a lot of intelligent, societies that live way before us, thousands of years before us. You're
Yeah.
talking about Enoch, and Noah and all these. They were tall, big people, but they were a little different. But we had smart, intelligent cultures that could do things that we can't do today. I mean,
I
yeah,
I mean, engineers have said that the pyramids themselves are accurate within like a fraction of an inch, and that's something that today's engineers, with all of their tools, couldn't reproduce. So it shows what patience and accumulated know-how and you know
right.
care.
Well,
Also, lots and lots of laborers with working as paying their taxes through labor, skilled workmen
yeah.
could accomplish.
Now, you wrote a novel. Did you write a novel about ancient Egypt? And could you sum up that synopsis for us, Nikki?
Well, I've written a number. This Lord Hani Mysteries. There were 6 books in that series, but I'm currently writing a series of cozy mysteries, which are set in the reign of Tutankhamun. They're centered on a young woman who is a physician. She and her partner are physicians, and therefore they're able to do some forensic science occasionally on in a primitive way. Uh, but they're she's the daughter of this Hani the diplomat, so foreigners cross her path occasionally too, and she has a huge mastiff dog that does his part to help them out of difficulties and save them now and then. So it's a lighter series than the previous ones. I think there isn't much political intrigue involved, or it's more just your typical cozy mystery. I I thought that might be a nice way to draw people into something about ancient Egypt and slip a little information to them under guise of entertainment here.
Right. Every fiction book has its beginnings and ends somewhere. There's
Yeah.
some knowledge that goes into it. I just like my last book. You know, it's a sci-fi book, and I actually put some of my ET knowledge in it, some of my
Ah.
war knowledge in it, and
Mm.
that type and angel knowledge in it, God, and it's Palladians, ET race, and a human that get together. But I try to put in some facts in talking through my main character, and I was wondering if that's how you do it too. You take some facts and you run with it and stretch it out, and probably put your opinion on it, or you actually put your actual, I guess, investigative findings on it. Is that how you do it, Nikki?
Yeah, absolutely, and more so in the Lord Hani books because they were more political intrigues, and they were based actually on real events that are just sort of very briefly mentioned in a document called the Amarna Letters, which was a set of political or diplomatic correspondence from the reign of Akhenaten and his father
Hmm.
that happened to be baked in a fire, and so they were preserved. They were tablets. They were written in Akkadian, which was not the Egyptian language, but it was those little events and the people who were mentioned, and that's how we know about Hani himself. He was a real diplomat who was involved in some of these events. So there were these nuggets of reality there, and Hani himself was a, a non-fictional character.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to those and spun a story around it to explain, how these people happened to be involved and how these events came about. So it's exactly what I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I guess the reign of ISIS, that was around 2200 BC, I think. No,
Uh, we don't know if she was a real person or, just a
oh,
divinity.
yeah. What about now you say divinity? How do you
Mhm.
what do you mean by that, Nikki?
Well, whatever their gods were, I mean, they're either concepts or some sort of superior being that they thought were divine. I certainly can't read their minds. But the fact that you mentioned Isis is interesting because she's an example of how forward looking their attitudes toward women were in ancient Egypt. They were very prominent in many professions, which haven't been subsequently very prominent until extremely recent times. As I say, the characters in this latest series of books are physicians, and that was not common, but it was something that happened. We even have a woman vizier in the Old Kingdom, which kind of that degree of prominence had sort of receded over time. But there are women village mayors and council members and things in villages. At the sort of local level, there was a fair bit of democracy. So it was interesting to me as a woman writer to
Well,
see how much women actually took part in life. They weren't just
mm,
stashed away as they were in some cultures.
yeah, well, they were queens and they were rulers, and they went
Exactly.
quite a
Yeah,
few. Yeah,
which did not happen in some societies.
right. Uh, they had an outlook on death. That they took this journey uh, through death, and that's why in their tombs they have all these supplies and things that
Right.
they take with them. But they have a different kind of outlook than we did about death, and it's a journey for them. And to us, it's scary. I guess we're still, in the Western culture, we're still not really ready for death, and we don't like that.
Mhm.
We lose loved ones and we grieve, and what's worse, grieving or dying? A lot of times, so. Uh, yeah, that's the thing. Let me get back on track here. I get off, but I love Egyptian culture. I love the historical culture of it. Now, when the Egyptians, I don't know if you got into this, but when the Egyptians started up, did the Atlanteans actually go into Egypt and started putting a society together? Egypt.
I couldn't answer that because there's no physical scientific evidence to indicate who or where the Atlanteans were. Uh, I would say, as a student of classical antiquity, that Atlantis stories perhaps got started with the explosion of the island of Thera, which was in the 17th century BC, so much later than the origins of ancient Egypt.
Right.
Um, but other than that, if the Atlanteans were a real people, then unless I can see physical evidence, then I can't, as an archaeologist, I can't say whether or not they existed. So
Yeah.
um, I'm not, completely against the idea, but I can't prove it either.
Yeah. Did you do any work in Egypt, archaeological work?
I have never excavated in Egypt. I've been in Crete and in Israel,
Mhm.
but I've worked with Egyptian materials to some extent, but only as it occurred in the Near East. So, as I say, I'm not really an Egyptologist.
Mhm.
I had taught a class in ancient Egypt, on a basic level, and that's how I knew people were interested in it, and therefore I thought it might make a good setting for a series of books.
I got a public relations paper proposal on Howie Sawas, and he's the director of antiquities there in Egypt, and he has all to say about what goes on. And I think he's still in power, but I noticed that he's had some people come there and interview him and talk. They told him, they said, Howie Sawas, did the ETs build these pyramids? And you know what he would do?
No.
He would send them back to the airport, and he says, "Get back to the States or wherever you come from. We're not talking anymore." So he won't
Yeah.
even have it. You mentioned ETs to always to us, he will not have it. And I heard there's been a lot of reporters and a lot of documentarists that was just thrown out of the country because they mentioned ETs. So but I thought about that and I said, well, he wouldn't like me anyway if I started
I've
strangers
actually
out.
met him, but I
Is
don't
he?
know him well.
Yeah. But he's quite a character, a smart guy,
Yeah, he's a character.
and
I
he
don't believe he is. I don't believe he is the director of antiquities anymore, and the man's name escapes me, but it's
yeah, there's
someone
a
else.
there's a younger guy I think that
Yeah.
I've seen him on the documentaries before, but he's open to the idea that there is other cultures probably mixed in, and involved with some, sharing some technology with the
Yeah.
Egyptian people.
Awesome.
That could be possible. It's just like now, we're looking at technologies that like we can't even touch now, and these, like I said, they're a lot of brilliant civilizations way before us, thousands of years before us, maybe even millions of years, because they found things like hammers and spark plugs and things of that nature that date back 2, 3 million years ago. So we've been here and gone and back and forth, whatever. But uh, now, behind the scenes, insights into the reign of Akhenaten, uh, the father of King Tut, and the turbulent dynamics of his kingdom. Akhenaten, could you tell us what you know about him, Nikki?
Yes, he was the second son of Amenhotep III, and his name was Amenhotep, and he would have been the fourth. But when he came to the throne, he eventually changed his name from Amun is satisfied to serviceable to the Aten, because he changed his whole allegiance and the emphasis of Egyptian religion away from Amun Ra, the Theban sun god, to the Aten, which was the visible face of the sun. It was Egyptians had always recognized that there was an Aten. I mean, this was sort of the divinized visual aspect of the sun,
Right.
but it was a minor aspect of the sun worship of the sun, and so Akhenaten changed that, and eventually, little by little, started stamping out the whole cult of Amun Ra. It was probably political. We don't know his motivation, of course, but certainly the priests of Amun Ra had become enormously powerful. And they were a huge landowner and employed tens of thousands of people. So he may well have felt they were really rivaling the king in power and wanted to kind of cut the ground out from under their feet, which he did, and thereby crashed the economy, and was not content simply to change the religion, but with the religion went the whole Egyptian worldview, the idea of an afterlife, which, as you pointed out, was very, very, very important to them. It changed the whole conventions of their art, which were religiously based. He changed the way in which people wrote the spoken language. It was more like the spoken language than what had previously been the written language, which was much more formal. So, I mean, the repercussions of his actions were enormous. We can't even imagine how important, how central, how, uh, what a basis of the whole society religion was for them. And uh, the concept of kingship and the concept of justice, everything, it just shook everything up. So people had to go along with him during his lifetime, but almost immediately after his death, uh, the water just swept back over his so-called reforms and washed it all away. I mean, he had built a new capital, sort of halfway between the old northern capital and southern capital. And as soon as he had left, it was evacuated, fell into ruin immediately. Everyone moved out. His name was taken out of the histories, so that, it's as if things went from Amenhotep III directly to uh, who was the next one to show up, I guess Horemheb. So his whole family was just sort of cut out of history. It was an amazingly successful damnation of memory there. So much so that when people started finding archaeological artifacts that belonged to the reign of Akhenaten, they had no idea who that was. They'd never heard of such a being. So it was pretty strong backlash.
Now, from what I remember, Nikki, the Osiris and Isis, were they blood kinship? Were they brother and sister?
Probably. I mean, that was very typical of royalty in those days to marry their sisters, even their daughters, at least in the New Kingdom.
Right.
Um, I don't remember, to be quite honest, if they were brother and sister, but it was for sure the gods did commit incestuous marriages like that because there was no one else there, at the beginning of time. There was nobody there but the brother and sister gods. So that's, I guess they're excused.
Yeah, that's that. Heck, actually, they did that in England too. I mean, throughout the years, you know.
Yeah, they were all too closely related. We know that.
Yeah,
And in fact, I mean, it's ironic, but that's probably what brought an end to the 18th dynasty. Is Akhenaten left a son and six daughters, but then none of them seem successfully to have reproduced. Tutankhamun, we don't know exactly if he had any children, but we found two little mummified fetuses of girls that were probably presumably his children, seemed genetically to have been, and if so, they didn't make it even to birth, and he didn't seem to have any other children. So that was the end of his dynasty. It had to pass to someone else.
right. And there's another fallacy that we've learned throughout history. Of course, history's all wrong. We know that. There's a lot of that we've been told the wrong thing about history. But in the Egyptian culture, the pyramid builders, the people who built them, were actually paid and well taken care of. They,
Exactly. They were citizens paying their taxes in labor.
yeah, yeah. So they were actually they had homes for them. They fed them. They give them beer. You know, they had that
Yeah.
was big time back then in Egypt. But that's something else a lot of people don't think. They think all these people who built the pyramids were slaves and they worked eight
Yeah.
hours a day. But that's not true. Uh,
No, in fact, until very late in their history, the Egyptians didn't even have chattel slavery the way we think of it. It was they had poor people could sell themselves, so to speak, into a kind of serfdom or temporary slavery to pay off their debts. And then when they had made enough to buy themselves back, so to speak, then they were free. In the New Kingdom, once they're in contact more frequently with other cultures that did have slaves, that started creeping in a little in the form of war captives. But in terms of great huge populations of workmen. No, those were hired citizens, and they were treated well, as you say. They were. We even have an example of citizen workmen rising up and going on strike because they weren't getting paid. And
yeah,
I thought that was, that's pretty modern.
right. And I think that we followed our Christianity and our political, setup
Mhm.
actually started from them. I mean,
Yeah,
they had everything going just like we do now, except every big, I guess, society comes to an end some way. You take Egypt and you take Rome, and I hope that doesn't happen here in the U.S. You know,
I do too.
it's the whole world is going crazy at this point, but uh, I love the ancient Egyptian, you know, history. I believe it's more than what a lot of people think it is, and you have
Mhm.
found out some. Now you've been on digs in Greece, and also you were on, I guess, some projects in Jerusalem or Israel. Did you
You're
go?
right. Yeah.
You go there for the pilgrimage? I guess being a nun, you might want to go.
Well, no, I didn't actually. I went as an archaeologist. I was excavating in Galilee on the site of Sepphoris, which is it's like a mile from Nazareth, so it's familiar to the Christian story.
Mhm.
But it's a national park now. It was a Greco-Roman city in Galilee of the nations, and our mission for this excavation was to see if the Jewish population of that area was living a life according to their own precepts, or if they had pretty much taken on a Western style of life. And the results were mixed. I mean, they were pretty well integrated into the rest of the Roman Empire there, or well, it was the Seleucid kingdom too in the Hellenistic period.
Right. Now, did you find out or research or do you teach about Moses in Egypt and what happened during those times? Uh,
I have never taught that in any of my classes. We referenced it in the Egypt class, excuse me, the Egypt class, just to speculate about when, if, when and if that might have happened, if there were any events in Egyptian history that could have reflected the Egyptian side of that story. But the fact is, they wouldn't have talked about it if it was not in their, and it didn't make them look good. So that was like Akhenaten; it would have been cut out of their history. So I think a lot of people want to put it in the reign of Ramses II, just because he built a lot of the cities up in the kind of the corner where by Sinai. But I think it's more likely that this happened in a later period in the 7th century BC. It seems to match up with the events and the locations, particularly in the flight through the wilderness there, crossing Sinai. The places like Kadesh Barnea, for example, the sites that are mentioned
mhm.
are sites that didn't exist until the 7th century. So certainly it wasn't written any earlier than that. It might have reflected earlier events and just sort of had modern stuff mixed into it, or else it reflected something that occurred in the 7th century. So I don't think anybody knows exactly yet. So I won't come
Yeah.
out with an opinion on that.
Well, the reason why I ask you, we got into Israel and we got into, the Christianity, their part in Israel, and then I wanted to go back to Moses and find out what you talk or teach about Moses. The other thing though too is I think wasn't Solomon's temple something like 900 BC?
Right. Yeah.
How could that time mix together like Moses and Solomon? Wouldn't Moses had taken his people back, to hit their home and before I guess Solomon come along, Nikki?
Uh, that's a good point. I haven't seen anybody actually address that. If it was 7th century, that would put it a little after the fact, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would.
So probably, or at least likely, it was written in the 7th century, but something that happened earlier, and therefore Ramesses, who was the 12th century, would have been a pretty likely period.
Yeah. Yeah, the 12th century. But you went to Israel. Did you get close to the tomb of Christ or the church sepulcher or whatever there?
Yes, the Holy Sepulchre. I was there actually. We worked in Israel. I mean, in Jerusalem, in alternate summers. So we dig one summer and then operate out of the Albright Institute, which is like a school of archaeology there, where we stored our finds, and then so in those alternate summers we'd work on them there. So I did spend a fair bit of time in Jerusalem, and it was a
At your
very
yeah, wondering why you're not going to bed.
yeah. He says I've turned as nocturnal as he is. He's it was a wonderful experience. I thought Jerusalem was an amazing place to see the garden and the tomb and everything. It was quite moving.
Yeah. Did any of your novels cover that trip and with your visitation there?
No, they all take place in the deep past. So and mostly a lot earlier than that. I've never done anything of the period of Christ.
Yeah. They've uncovered a vault underneath where they say that Jesus was laying there on that slab there at the Holy Sepulchre. And then they just found this out the last couple of years. There's another room and a little tunnel right under that area.
I was unaware.
Yeah, they found that. That's been on TV and they talked about it. And I was wondering what they were getting at. What were they saying that Jesus' body was transported through this tunnel out to
Mm,
somewhere else or something?
I don't know.
I don't know what they're getting at, but they showed that the room that they said it was right underneath where Christ's tomb lays there in the church. So that's very interesting. I've always been
Yeah.
interested in that. People ask me if you like to go back in time, where would be the first place you'd go? I said I'd like to go back during Jesus' time. and see what that was all about. And
Yeah,
that would,
that would answer some questions, wouldn't it?
yes, yes, yeah. If we do have time machines, but we're not privy to them. I guess somebody else is, but that's beside the point. That's technology they don't want to talk
Yeah.
about. But no, out of all these places, and then Greece is a fabulous place, and they got new findings there, new digs there. So
And there's always something new, yeah.
yeah,
And that's great. That expands our knowledge. And as you said earlier, it sometimes overthrows what we thought we knew before.
yeah, it sure does. That what's that one culture was in Greece, and I'm trying to think who you think out of all the Middle Eastern uh, countries that have come up and had societies, who would be the oldest? You think the Greece,
Mm.
the Egyptians, the Judeo didn't come along until a little later.
No, I'd say probably the Mesopotamians, but the Egyptians come close. Mesopotamia is pretty highly organized, even 4,000 years before Christ. And the Egyptians were a little after that. They borrowed some things from Mesopotamia. It seems increasingly clear, and yet it was, their culture was totally distinct in their own. So it's hard to say who was the first. The Chinese were probably doing it too. We just didn't have any contact with them.
Yeah. If I went through the book of you know, uh, it's all the way back to Noah and to his Methuselah, his grandfather or whatever. But I went all the way back and took a look at those dates and stuff. They said that the Garden of Eden was. They said that the book of Enoch didn't take place until 400 years after or 500 years after the Garden of Eden event where humans started, together. Uh,
Yeah,
so, but in the Bible, it's kind of you've been a nun for a while, and you probably studied a lot of this through Catholicism. The Adam and Eve story, to me, it doesn't make sense because what happened was, Abel or one of the sons went to another over the across the mountain way, and he got involved in another a human society, and then they were supposed to be the only ones on earth to start,
yeah.
Adam and Eve. So it's kind of confusing. Did you learn anything from that, Nikki?
Well, I would say that the Garden of Eden story is a myth, and I don't mean that it's not true. I mean a myth in the anthropological sense, which is a, a literary story that explains a deeper truth. So, I don't think we can read Genesis as a historical document. It's intended to be a religious document and to teach us truths about faith and where we fit into the world and everything, and not necessarily to give us dates and things of that sort. So I think it's treacherous to look at it and expect much precision in terms of order or dating or anything like that. It's we don't have enough context to make that make sense as an actual description of deeds. I think and this is not a literalist interpretation, so I don't want to offend anybody, but it's I would say it. Well, I'll stop there. It is a literary, a story created around broader spiritual truths that makes them sort of concrete and able to be visualized by humans trying to grasp something that is cosmic.
Yeah, it's just like Jesus. He did a lot of paraphrasing, and
Yeah, the parable. I mean, it's in all of these. I'm not trying to diminish the divine origin of it in any way, but it's written in the forms that were familiar to people of that time and place. And so we have, Egyptian literature that is absolutely parallel to the
Yeah.
various books of the Bible,
Yes.
uh, because that's the way the people of Israel thought, and that's how they understood. If you're going to write something down, this is how you write it down. So uh, I think that's a beautiful reality and not something that should make us feel threatened at all.
Right. There's a lot of ancient societies and races that they have the story of the flood in their
Yeah,
book.
exactly.
Yeah, they all write about the flood. They write about the beginning of time. Of course, Central America, South America, they have a different, theory. Like two people come down from the skies and they were angels and they started their civilization. But they all have a different twist on it. But it's similar. It's similar. The whole thing is very similar to the stories that you see throughout our history and
Yeah.
mankind. Uh, I know I look at the Pope and what's going on today, going in the current events. I heard that the Pope said, and he's made some Vatican rules that if anybody's caught trespassing on the Vatican grounds or trying to get in there and look at the records, of course they keep those very sacred and very holy. I don't know if you've been to the Vatican, have you, Nikki?
I've just been there as a tourist. This
Mhm.
was 35, 40 years ago. So
Yeah. But they're saying now, the Pope is saying that he's going to reinforce the laws of anybody trespassing in the Vatican, and he will put them in jail, for five,
mm,
10 years. And he's very strong about it. Also, here's something else he mentioned. I just heard this today that the Pope is talking about illegal immigrants being around the Vatican or being, in Vatican City there, that he will not tolerate it. That
mm,
they'll,
I
yeah,
haven't heard any of this, so I can't comment on it.
but actually he said that, and he's making a strong rule that they will be deported and they will not be able to stay in the Vatican City area. That's a country to itself, I guess. It's
Yeah, it is. And I suppose if he's saying this, it's because they've had a problem with it. I mean, people
yeah.
may be seeking refuge there thinking, oh, they won't drag me out of the St. Peter's Church or something. So I don't know.
But here's the same Pope who's telling other countries to open their doors to immigrants, you know, and
Mm,
in Europe and France, Germany, UK, they're they're overloaded with immigrants, just like the US. We're
yeah,
to the point where we can't afford, to take care of all these people. And it's somewhere we got to use some logic. And I guess maybe the Pope is starting to use some logic now. Instead of telling other countries to open your doors and let all these immigrants in, then he's setting he's setting a standard for himself and for the rest of the world that, okay, watch your gates, make sure
yeah.
your gates are closed and you're not allowing so many people in that it destroys, everything that you have. And we're looking.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's only going to get worse because of global warming. I mean, it's going to pretty much make uninhabitable large parts of the equator and also all the political instability around the world. You see all these African countries, for example, collapsing, and in South America, so many dictators rising, and those people want to get away, and you can't blame them. There have been moments like this before. I mean, this is something very similar to what brought down the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Uh, that you, it just happens ever so often. There's the perfect storm of things that get people moving, and when you have millions on the march, you just can't stop them. I mean, I don't know what the solution to this is, but it's going to be an ever increasing problem until something is.
Right. Justin Trudeau, he's quitting his office in Canada,
Right.
and because it's the people that just don't like what he's a dictator, they call him. So now they got somebody else that's going to run the country. The Canadians are happy, and then you got soon to be President Trump, who wants to take Greenland and Canada and make them the 51st and 52nd state.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's I guess there's reasoning behind all that. I mean, we're looking at a possible war with China and Russia. Of course, Egypt had to live with that too. They had
Of
enemies.
course.
They fought battles all the time. South Africa, not South, Northern Africa. And I guess there was also the didn't the Jewish go up against the Egyptians sooner or later after they
Oh
did?
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah, they actually attacked from the north. But I guess some kings or queens in Egypt didn't they weren't as ferocious as maybe the earlier kings and queens were, and they were trying to be more civilized, but doing so, they weakened their position.
Excuse me.
Yeah, they weakened their position, and your kitty cat's mad at you.
He is, and I apologize for that.
That's okay. But we'll finish up here. I know it's late where you're at. Discoveries of archaeological digs in Greece and Israel that inspired your fiction. What were some of the things that inspired your fiction from those locations? Or were there certain you did say one archaeological dig that it was exciting, Nikki. Is there anything else that was exciting that really sparked some ideas for your books?
Um, the site of Ugarit in Syria was very interesting to me, and that's actually because of that site. It's is how I got started writing fiction. There was a divorce, a royal divorce, at some point in this. It was a city state on the coast. It's Latakia, Syria now, right there where there's a war again, and there was the king divorced the wife that his overlord, the Hittite emperor, had made him marry. And we have a small set of documents that deal with that. So you get just a few lines from the king saying what he's doing, and something else from the woman's brother in the nearby kingdom. And it's just little snippets. And you got a sense of what was happening, but you didn't really know the details. And when I was teaching my students, I had a class on ancient Near Eastern empires. So this isn't really archaeological; it's documentary. I gave them those documents, those very few little statements, and said, "Okay, reconstruct what happened." And they each put their shoulder to the wheel, and it was clear when I started seeing what they had to say that there was as much fiction in this as there was historiography, because we just didn't have enough hard facts.
Right.
You almost had to speculate to say anything, and so I thought to myself, well, you know, there's a novel in here someplace. I think when I retire, maybe I'll just forget about sticking to the facts and let my imagination go and connect the dots that way. So that little event in the 13th century BC was kind of what started me down the path of writing novels.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sounds like our modern days today. The politicians don't stick to the facts. I mean, they don't let facts
Yeah,
get in the way of a good story. Uh,
true.
what what we learned from studying the dynamics between totalitarianism and the regime and its servants, and you also mentioned it over here, the challenges and rewards of bringing ancient history authentically to today. I guess you can explain both of those. And Trudeau, we just talked about Trudeau, and then the South
Yeah.
American countries. Nikki, you might want to expand on that.
Well, the as to the first point, the idea of the servants of the regime having to deal with their conscience, I had sort of mentioned that earlier with the Lord Honey mysteries, which were political intrigue in large part that were based on these Amarna letters. So real events, the kernels of real events there, and real people involved, mixed in with fictional characters. But that was the sort of the substratum of all of those books was Hani, who's a very upright and honest, honorable man, and his family, his wife is a priestess, a chantress of Amun Ra. So you can imagine how his family felt about these supposed reforms at the hands of Akhenaten. And yet he had to serve the king. I mean, that was, his oath of office, so to speak, was to serve the king. And so what do you do when the king is the bad guy? You know that your boss is telling you to do things that are completely against your conscience. So that was kind of that strain, in addition to the events, and there was also a mystery involved, murder mystery involved. Uh, the second part. I forgot actually what your second
I
part
think
was.
the challenges and rewards of bringing in
Ah,
history authentically to life today. So we had kings and queens and we had dictators all throughout our
right.
history.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm talking about, and that's why Trudeau was called a dictator, and he had to step down. And we've had other dictators, like you said, in South America, and Brazil is starting to, it's starting to come back, I think. But yet,
Yeah, I think so. It's
yeah,
a bad moment for dictators.
yeah,
Well, of course, in ancient Egypt, the king was an absolute ruler. I mean, there was not even a pretense of democracy at
right.
the state level. It was he had absolute power. There were no checks and balances. Technically, all the resources of Egypt belonged to him personally, and other people became rich or powerful only through his favor. So it was he could do whatever he wanted, and hopefully prudence would guide him, or at least he had viziers and who were sort of like prime ministers, and other people under him who were expert in various levels of life. But if he didn't want to listen to them, he didn't have to. And they didn't have a code of law or a constitution in the same way that most modern states do.
Mhm.
It was more just custom. So it was not customary for people to go unpunished if they killed somebody, for example. And so they had judges that, or any magistrate could do it, I guess, to sit in judgment, and people could have someone else represent them in court, and there were juries of peers and all of this, but it wasn't really enshrined in a constitution. It was just this is the way we handle things here.
Mhm.
So I think the more people learn about the ways in which other cultures have attacked the problems of living together in society, it a makes you realize how lucky you are to live in a democracy, a developed democracy,
Mhm.
and also it gives you ideas about what can happen if you're not careful. And as I say, that at the same period, all this social upheaval was going on. There was a plague, and I was writing this series at the time when COVID had struck, and there were just too many parallels. So
Yeah,
I I thought it sometimes it's easier to look at a novel and see people dealing with problems at arm's length than trying to reflect too hard on your own because you're right in the middle of that and it's hard to be objective. So, sometimes fiction's a good way to examine
right.
the
It
world
is, and
around
also,
you, strangely.
yeah, and it's also a good way to telling the story about history, and we
Yeah,
we can learn lessons from history, like you were saying, and by seeing what they've done wrong, like dictators.
exactly.
And take a look at Venezuela and these other countries that that are socialist. They're not succeeding. They're starving. So why
Yeah.
don't we look at this and say, hey, we got to do something different. Here in the States, we are evolving now in a different direction. Canada is and UK starting to change. I don't know
Yeah.
about the other countries, but Putin will always stay the same. He's Putin. Yeah. So, uh,
Well, of course, Putin too took advantage of a democracy that was a little tottering there. I mean, the Russians had no experience of democracy when the Soviet Union fell. They were doing their best, but it got corrupted pretty early on. And you know, authoritarian government is efficient, if nothing else. It doesn't have to go through all the messy stuff of asking people's advice. So,
Let me
that's
let me read off this paragraph you got here. I'm going to explain some things about history. Whether you're drawn to the intrigue of mysterious assassinations, forbidden love affairs, or political rebellion, you you work promises a page-turning journey through history with their vibrant characters and richly detailed settings. Holmes ensures every reader gets a front row seat to the drama of ancient Egypt and a glimpse into our own world through the lens of the past. And we learn from the past and we can see, a lot of people say, oh, history, I hate history. I don't like it. I liked history. Uh,
me too.
uh,
If it's boring to them, it's because it's been badly taught.
right. Yeah, and I think we can learn something from history. A lot of people keep saying, "Well, you read history and study history so we can learn from it because of the mistakes." Like you said earlier, you alluded to all these rulers and kings and queens, and even kings and queens, I guess, have learned their lesson about how to run, a society. But that's, you talk about assassinations and you talk about, I guess, forbidden love affairs, political rebellion. It looks like the human race hasn't changed in 1,000 of years.
I'm sorry to report that that is true.
It's it's all is it all human nature? Is it or is it just taught by our societies, Nikki?
I think it's just human nature. Maybe that's defeatist, but if you look at a society of chimpanzees, for example, they're not doing any better than we are. I, the truth is we only have a certain range of emotional responses to whatever stimuli hits us in the world, and so everybody's going to do the same thing every time. I mean, if someone hits you, you hit back.
Right.
It's just going to happen every time unless we stop and think and sort of put our values into gear and say we've got to be better than this. And it takes effort. And laziness is part of our biological nature, just like violence. So it's an uphill climb. Let's face it. We have to be very mindful and make a lot of effort to improve. And you think we're improving, things are looking better. We have the United Nations and people are living in peace, and then bingo.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It could be discouraging, uh, but it need not be
And
because effort is possible. People can make an effort.
when I was in Vietnam, I knew that war. That's why I wrote the my second book, Senseless Wars, and they are senseless. We're
Yeah,
killing each other and destroying things,
yeah.
and I think we're being pushed into it by the elites and the people who control the money. It's
The people who get rich off war.
yes, the greed that goes into it. I look at that, and history shows you the same thing. That's why King James, he put together that Bible, the King James, because he wanted people to feel guilty about stealing and robbing his gold. He wanted to stay rich and keep the peasants poor. And I think that's how it is in the socialism, like in Venezuela and these other countries. And my goodness, we had people here in the States talk about socialism, and I thought, you're crazy. You don't want to go into socialism. That's not the way to go.
Yeah.
It's
Either extreme leads to tyranny, and I'm afraid it's not good for the people.
mhm,
It's democracy has value that no other system does.
yeah. Okay, but getting back to the Pope, I must say that I think him and his staff believe in extraterrestrials. I actually think they
That's
met them.
possible.
They know about them.
They
Uh,
certainly believe in angels.
yeah, they do. And angels are, I asked a lot of scientists, what's the difference between an angel, a spirit, a ghost, or an extraterrestrial? And then they think not much because they're all extraterrestrial because they're coming in from somewhere from out there,
Somewhere other than Earth. Yeah,
another dimension. They are coming in. Angels even pop in from other dimensions. So that's the whole. It's a mysterious life, isn't it, Nikki?
it's very mysterious, and I write mysteries, so that's a certain level of mystery. But I think life itself is far more mysterious in many aspects.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I think what it will do is we'll call it your kitty cat is so
He
tired.
is. This is just awful. I'm going to have to lock him up next time.
That's okay though. It's late there, and I didn't know it was going to be that late. But we've been talking about going on an hour and 15 minutes, so that's enough.
Oh, well, okay. We've done our duty, I
We've
guess.
done our duty. I don't like keeping the viewers too long. I don't go to these 2 hour shows anymore, or I
Yeah.
try to cut it short even before an hour and a half, so people have a chance to sit down. Because in this modern day and age with the internet age, they your time of spending on a story is probably only about 3 minutes. You want to see a three.
Yeah, if you're the TikTok generation,
Yeah,
certainly is up for a
TikTok.
2 hour show.
Yeah. Uh, could you tell us what you're going to be doing next, Nikki? And could you tell us how we can get a hold of your books?
Yeah, the books are all available on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, any of these online stores, and some brick and mortar stores too, I'm sure. I I'm working currently on this series of cozy mysteries called the Hani's Daughter Mysteries, and there is book number four, or no, book number five, I believe is book number four is coming out in February or March of this year.
Mhm.
That's called the Melody of Evil.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm working on the next book already. So at some point, probably fall, that will be out too.
Yeah. You were talking about people book writers aren't really lazy. You have to be disciplined. You,
Yeah, you do. You kind of keep your nose to the grindstone.
I'm an old guy and I didn't start writing till 3 years ago, but then I found out how disciplined you have to be.
Yeah.
You got to set aside 3 or 4 hours at a time and set aside a room, quiet room, and you had
Yeah.
to be relaxed and write. Well, you know this more than me. You wrote 14. I only wrote four, but that's a good taste for me. But yeah, I know it takes discipline, but has any of your books ever been put into a documentary or ever have you ever been a consultant on anything, Nikki?
No, no, it's a pretty obscure niche, to be quite frank. It's hard to know who reads them. I guess people who are interested in antiquity is, or maybe people who are interested in mysteries. But um, I can see this cozy mystery series making a good TV show. It would be pretty probably high cost settings and special effects and everything, but I think it'd be lots of fun.
Well,
However,
it could be
when
worse than Lord of the Rings, you know.
well, yeah, true. That's true. Somebody suggested they use the old Cleopatra set or something.
Yeah, bring in Elizabeth Taylor. Yeah, but
Yeah,
no,
talk about beings from another planet.
right. Uh, it's very, I like talking about, uh, you know, ancient cultures and there's uh, Tartarians. Have you heard of them?
I have not. No.
They were a society, and they were from Tartaria, but they were master builders, like Solomon Temple, those people, and they were master builders, and they would build, like in St. Louis, they had the World's Fair in
Right. Yeah.
1902. They built these huge buildings a mile long, and they were very architecturally beautiful. And then after 2 years, they tore them down.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It
Th-
is.
And they think they had modern machinery, and they had skateboards, and they had little motorcycles and everything back. And Tartarian times is, you can't put your finger on it. It's kind of like we went through a reset, for our
Yeah.
societies. And you look back on history like you're doing, but the what you're writing about is actually history too, because you're writing there's some realism in a lot of your stories. So it's just like me and book. I know that I put some realism in that, but uh hidden reality. And I guess with your books you do the same thing. But it's nice talking to you. And your books are NL, right? NL Holmes.
N.L.Holmes, right? Yeah.
They look up N.L. Holmes. I'll have that in the narrative when I post the video. And I want to thank you, Nikki Holmes, writer, professor, nun. I mean, religious,
Interior decorator.
interior decorator, and the owner of a kitty cat.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Okay, but I thank you for being on the show, especially
My pleasure.
finding out you're from Europe, and it's wee hours of the morning there. So I'm privileged now to have you on. I thought, wow, this is great. This is good. That it's not good for you, but it's kind of like, wow, I was lucky to get you at this time of night. But
I'm sort of out of sync with the states these days.
yeah, okay. But maybe you write your next few books. Maybe we'll get back together and I'll post this and
Sounds
I'll
good.
send you the links to this. Nikki Holmes, thank you so much for being on the show. This is Dave
Thanks for
Emmons.
having
Yeah, Dave Emmons with A Strange Reality. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to the show and hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Good night,
me.
everybody.